we all asked in the sector for a long time. So I made what's known as a freedom of information request. They rejected the release of those recommendations. I appealed to the Office of the Victorian Information Commission, and they found in my favour and said you have to release those recommendations. Rather than do that, though, they've hired more lawyers. There's been a lot of lawyers involved already, but more lawyers to take it to court to appeal that decision. This stuff needs to be public. It's not like, it's not that sensationalist. It's just about where the system's doing well and where it needs to improve. Yeah, we've been asking for a few years, myself and other people. The Royal Commission actually recommended service level data, so it said like to drive better performance, you need to publish service level data, because if you kind of keep it all general, then the lowest performing ones can cut free ride on the benefits of the best performing ones. Having transparency can allow people in. We've got Warrnambool, which is a small town near the border with South Australia. It can help people in that area know where their specific hospital ranks relative to others, but also where it needs to improve.
Right, my name is Dr. Matthew Aistiello. Welcome to Researching Happy. This is the podcast all about the stories behind the studies of the happiness and wellbeing research world. Sorry, this episode is a little bit late. I've been a bit under the weather and it was busy. It was Father's Day. In Australia, I don't think it's Father's Day around the world. I'm pretty sure Hallmark has to sort of flatten out their cash flow, make sure that there's not too many peaks and troughs. So we paid our money for our cards this weekend. So happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Don't buy Hallmark cards. So welcome to episode 21. We take a bit of a different approach today. So while this show is mostly about the researchers, as we say, the stories behind the studies, there's an entire ecosystem around mental health research that's worth listening to and worth, hearing and sharing. And today is a bit of a new aspect to that ecosystem as far as this show is concerned, which is human rights advocacy. So this week we host Simon Katterl, who is fresh from a legal battle with the Mental Health Complaints Commission of Victoria in Australia. Simon advocates for improved mental health and community services by promoting human rights, co-design, and consumer leadership across all aspects of service planning, delivery, and evaluation. He runs a consultancy company and, by the sounds of things, keeps himself very, very busy. This is a riveting episode, if I do say so myself, or a riveting conversation. It was, at least for me. As we walk through Simon's experience seeking information on a particular set of data that he believes will be extremely useful for mental health system improvement. So he seeks the information, he's rejected, he launches or submits a freedom of information request, that's rejected. He appeals that rejection, which is successful, and now there's an appeal of the appeal. So it's a very serious topic, obviously. But Simon brings plenty of levity and fun to the conversation, which I love. I'm sure there are two sides to the story, but Simon is extremely transparent. He has basically kept all the receipts, and as we go through the episode, he mentions a bunch of links that he'll make available, and you'll find them all in the show notes. So if you're grabbed by Simon's cause, there's also a link to a petition that you can help support what Simon's up to. So in terms of the show, you can stay in touch on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Subscribing and making and rating the show makes a huge difference, and thanks to those who have done that so far. And we're planning a catch-up for the Researching Happy community in a few weeks. And if you're keen on joining, let me know on LinkedIn. You can just message me. So thank you all and welcome, Simon. All right, so here we are with Simon Katterl. Is that, hopefully I'm pronouncing that the right way? Katterl?
The second, they're both pretty good, actually. Yeah. So,
okay.
I get very weird ones. That was pretty close to the mark.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Trust me, me too. I get all sorts, all over the place. Look, we've basically just met. I've been following what you've been doing online for a little while there, and it seems I mean, I just basically have a million questions, but it seems like very good work. So it'd be great just to quickly introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's stoked to be here, Matt. So my name's Simon Katterl. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here on Wurundjeri country, and I guess a lot of the work that I assume you're not talking about all the cat photos I post, so you're probably talking more about my mental health stuff. But I do a lot of work in mental health around the intersection of mental health and human rights, mental health and
Yeah.
governance, which can make people's eyes glaze over, but I reckon it's pretty interesting. And lived experience as it relates to mental health. So I've got my own lived experience of mental health issues, of trauma. Um, I haven't had, but a lot of my work actually focuses on involuntary treatment, and I haven't had that experience. So, yeah, I sort of navigate between the personal and the professional, and I've worked in some roles where you are sort of designated, so it's a designated role for somebody with lived experience of distress, and you kind of intentionally work from that perspective and as a member of a broader community of people, often called the consumer community.
Yep.
Um, so that's where I'm situated these days. Mm.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I feel like my PhD supervisor, she was focused a lot about like forced restraint. So that sort of human rights lens. I heard, I sort of, from afar watching her work, I sort of got to see a fair bit of that. And it's
Yeah.
even just like human rights in general, I think it's not something that the average person really probably even knows much about.
No,
Is that, do you
it's
find that?
yeah. I think we're sort of we can be pretty complacent here in Australia.
Yeah.
But if you look at most of the things that we care about and most of the failures of government or health in the last 10 or 15 years, often they've been human rights failures. Robodebt was a failure of human rights. Most of the things that happen in mental health units are a failure of human rights. We've got aged care and the treatment of older Australians, and that's
Yeah.
a discrimination issue. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of the things that we end up caring about, have a human rights element to it. So I think once you sort of, the value of human rights is they don't solve everything, but they give you a language and a
Yeah.
framework to talk about the problem.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And just as like worlds colliding, so someone that I work with, she does a lot of disability work, and her husband is like an expert, I think, in human right law, and so I think she had these kind of sectors overlapping, and she has worked a little bit with Piers Gooding, who I believe you've worked with a little bit. So I
Yeah.
saw your name. Oh, it was kind of popping up everywhere, and then she handed me this report about, I think it's like human rights and AI, something cool like that.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah,
I
yeah.
see your name there as well, along with Piers. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, Piers was very generous in putting myself as a co-author. He did, sort of the massive lion's share of work. But I can say this being humble because I don't think this is primarily his work. It is an incredible piece of work. So it's called Digital Futures in Mind, and it is about the human rights elements of a lot of the digital mental health things that are sort of creeping into our personal lives, which there's probably a real opportunity for growth, well-being, support. But if it's done badly, it could go really badly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and that's just for people that are interested. I can put a link. I'm pretty sure it's a freely available download, right? I'll make
Yeah.
a note to put that out as a link. Um, so this is definitely not a journalism sort of style show. We're not out there breaking news or anything like that. But you have a pretty amazing story, and you happen to have just walked out of a court hearing. Am I correct?
You've got the breaking news, Matt.
Oh, it's
This
the
is it.
breaking news. Yeah,
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 cool.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
like
yeah.
no one has ever accused me of being up to date on basically anything, fashion or style or anything. So this is probably the first time. So, I mean, can we just walk back a few steps?
Yeah.
As I've understood it, and this is really from afar, you wanted some data about something. You put in a freedom of information request. That's been going on for probably a few years, if I understand correctly. And now somehow you've ended up being sort of sued from the person you were requesting data on. So it would be really interesting to hear this story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm definitely involved in a legal action at the moment. So it wouldn't be. I'm not getting sued, but so I'll give you the context for it. So I used to work at this place called the Mental Health Complaints Commission, and they sort of handle complaints about mental health services. So they've got all these amazing and incredible powers to, I guess, protect people's human rights. They were set up 9 years ago. So I worked there for a little while and advised there for 4 years too. Um, I guess when my reflections are just generally are a lot more could be done for that to work effectively. Um, uh, you know,
Meaning like receiving complaints and actioning them. Is that what you mean?
yeah, yeah. I mean, they've had 14,000 complaints and about $27 million in funding over that 9 years, and they've actually never issued a single compliance notice to follow the law.
Okay.
So there's 14,000 complaints where we can't be totally certain that the outcomes are what they should be, and so the scary thing is in that time we know from the Royal Commission that there's been systemic breaches of human rights. So how do you square 14,000 and zero
Yeah.
with systemic
Yeah.
human rights on one end? So that's the kind of context. And I've been doing advocacy, largely outside that commission since I finished working there and then finished advising there. And one of the things that's really important, and one of the reasons the commission gives for why they don't use compliance notices, so that direction to follow the law, is they say, oh, well, when we make voluntary recommendations to services, they just take them up and fix them and do them
Right.
immediately.
Right.
But they don't release those recommendations.
Okay.
So their recommendations about, or improve, the way you provide culturally safe care by giving training and X, Y, Z, really general kind of service level recommendations. Or it might be, if we were in a general hospital, I'm just making an analogy, improve your infection control procedures to do blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not asking for, nor did I claim, like, deal with Matt's problem with ABC treatment. That's personal information, not looking for it, not relevant. But they didn't want to release that. We all asked in the sector for a long time, so I made it what's known as a freedom of information request. They rejected the release of those recommendations. I appealed to the Office of the Victorian Information Commission, and so they're like they, I guess, review decisions about freedom of information. You'd
Okay.
have an equivalent there in South Australia, and they found in my favour and said you have to release those recommendations.
Okay.
Rather than do that, though, they've hired more lawyers. There's been a lot of lawyers involved already, but more lawyers to take it to court to appeal that decision. So about 20 minutes ago, we just finished up our VCAT hearing, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal hearing, where we set out, I guess, how we're going to manage this court case over the next little period. It's probably going to be close to a year that we'll be sort of going through
Seriously.
this. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I basically know nothing about the law or how any of these things work, but so sort of bear with me. But so you're saying there's been 14,000 complaints. There have been no sort of mandated, what was the language you used? Sorry?
Compliance notice. Yeah.
Compliance notices.
Yeah.
They say there's been voluntary recommendations. Do you think you assume there have been some, you just want to see them? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. I think if if we want to know where the system's working, you should be able to look at all of this. Like, this happens in lots of other areas, so this is strange that we're not releasing it. That's something to name. That it's strange that we're in this predicament. But
So there are
you
other
should know.
examples where things like these
Yeah.
these voluntary recommendations
They're
are
always
public.
public. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, for example, our Victorian Ombudsman, every annual report, they just publish them, and they also publish how much it's been implemented by each service.
Okay.
But that's it. So they do that in relation to other human rights stuff. So
And
I
that
don't
comes out
understand.
like in a de-identified way. So it's not like we told
Yeah.
this hospital to do this. It just says
Well, it
X
says the hospital,
organisation.
but it wouldn't. It would say the hospital, but you wouldn't be able to identify Matt or Simon, as
Right,
the
yeah.
original
Gotcha.
complainants through it.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's useful because if you're a patient in that hospital and something bad happens to you, maybe they use force when it wasn't appropriate to use force, or you got culturally, like you experience racism in mental health care, or you're a trans person and your gender identity isn't respected. If they've already had recommendations about that issue in the previous year or two, if you're making a complaint to the commission, you would be saying, look, you've already done a recommendation, so either they haven't implemented it, like you said, or in which case you need to enforce it. Or secondly, maybe the recommendation wasn't much good, and let's come up with a better recommendation together. But the problem is we don't know. So we don't know what's happening anywhere. So you're sort of walking in blind, and there's a risk that the same recommendations are being made to the same services for 9 years in a row, and then we've never had a compliance notice. So the thing is, we're kind of all walking blind in terms of where the system is improving and not improving. It would just help us adapt better collectively.
For sure. And so, I mean, like, and let's just put it in the background of like rates of mental illness and health conditions continue to rise. I won't say skyrocket, to rise. Availability of services is harder and harder. So I guess what I'm hearing you saying is we want to make sure, basically, for those who are able to access services, we want to make sure that they are compliant and doing the best job, not becoming the source of these 14,000 complaints. But we have no oversight over, and that's just Victoria as well. Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
And so then I mean, like, sounds very reasonable. What is the defense against releasing this information?
So there's kind of two principal defenses, and look, I can put the decision letter from the commission up on my website and link to it in your show notes so that people can go and read that in more depth. I'm not a freedom of information lawyer, so I'm self-represented in all of this stuff. So
have you studied law or something before?
Yeah, I've got a legal background, but it's sort of like a doctor is like there can't be a surgeon and a psychiatrist at the same time. It's very generalist. So I sort of I'm sort of walking a bit blind, but I'll give you my interpretation. So there's two principal reasons they gave. So one was they've got secrecy provisions, which kind of operates like mental health services go into this on the assumption that it's a secret process, but the law says that there's essentially a public interest test, and should this be released on a public interest test? And the Information Commissioner found that it should be released on that basis. The second reason and I think this is a pretty bad faith reason, and the one that should really set alarm bells, I think, for listeners. So the second reason they say is if Matt was the one who made a complaint, it breaches Matt's privacy. And I sort of remember hearing that because we spoke about that in advance of their decision, and I said, they tried to explain it to me. So if there's 30 what's the hospital nearest to you, Matt?
Flinders Hospital, sorry.
So I'm sure Flinders Hospital's great, but let's use them as an example. So if there's Flinders. This is all fictitious. If there's been 30 recommendations, like general service improvement recommendations, that have been made to Flinders for that year, they'll all be listed on the back page of this report that I'm seeking, right? So they're just listed 30 in a row. And one will be training for culturally safe care. The other one will be, infection procedures, whatever. If Matt made a complaint and Matt didn't have culturally safe care, they're saying because Matt could see that recommendation and identify himself in it, nobody else could. So none of your colleagues, nobody else in the world, literally nobody else in the world other than you and Flinders Hospital could identify you from that. Because you can identify yourself, it's breaching your privacy. So the test is, can the person identify themselves? And I just said, but that literally no new people get that information as a consequence. The same people have the same amount of information. I said, well, we care a lot about Matt's privacy. And I was like, well, maybe you should check with Matt and all the other people first, because I reckon they probably want that public.
That would then be, that would be the same standard of, like, is that say you use the example before of where this actually is publicly released.
Yeah.
Do they have that issue? They don't have that issue?
No, exactly. Well, that's my point, right? Like, how do they get away with it? Because Matt made a complaint to the Ombudsman, and then the Ombudsman do publish that every year, and they detail the level of implementation. And we don't hear stories of Matt being so triggered by the annual reports of of the Victorian Ombudsman and the privacy and whatnot. So it's pretty bad faith.
Yeah, the percentage of people who would even know that there's a report by the Ombudsman, maybe even they would even know that there is an Ombudsman. Like we're talking about a small percentage of people, and I put myself in that category. I mean, I think you could make the opposite argument that you would be validated to see, oh, my complaint, I see that it was lodged, and I can actually see that it's been followed up.
Consistently, that's what people are saying. That is consistently
Right.
what people
Okay.
with lived experience are saying. So, we've got a petition going at the moment where people who have made complaints are so dissatisfied that this stuff isn't happening. They're the ones who are saying, why hasn't there been a compliance notice? So they want to have a
Right.
look at all the recommendations too.
Right.
Um, one of the things I said when we were in negotiation was if you think this privacy stuff really matters, maybe you should send it to your lived experience advisory group and get them to
Yeah.
assess. Because I reckon if they were given the option, they would recommend that this stuff is public. And um, you know, I just think it's a no-brainer that this stuff needs to be public. So what it might reveal basically is the recommendations haven't been very good for 9 years, and that's okay. I mean, we're it's being rolled into a new commission that's going to start in about 10 days. It's an opportunity to reset,
Yeah.
so yeah, like some stuff didn't work, we didn't do great, but here's how we want to improve. So that's, I guess, why you're probably seeing a lot of advocacy from me, is that actually now's the time to accept some learnings and to admit to some things that you could do
Yeah.
better.
Well, absolutely. And you think, what is this new commission? Like we want them to be empowered with the information. Would that report be available to them, do you think? Or
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've reappointed the same commissioners from the old one to the
oh,
new one.
okay.
Uh,
Okay. I mean, I don't know much about anything, but that doesn't seem like a new commission.
No, no. But yeah, I mean, I haven't checked like the branding guidelines or the color schemes, but that all could be new. But they did that. They've gone from two commissioners, the two existing ones, to four. So there are two new ones, and I'm sure all are trying to do a good job, but it doesn't mean we can't do it better. So
Yeah.
there's really simple asks here, which is just release the data and then let's have a shared reflection on what's worked and what can improve. Those are pretty
Yeah.
small asks.
Okay. And so are there like sort of like for like across the other states in terms of mental health complaints commissions, and do they publish their stuff?
Well, that's the I guess the interesting thing is it got a very, I mean, you would find this working in public health and whatnot. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast with federalism, in that we have like some stuff that's at the Commonwealth level, some stuff that's at the state and territory level. So the punchline is every state has like a different commission with
Right.
a different powers and structures. That everyone's got their own kind of flavour. So Victoria has the one with like the coolest powers, but they've just never used them. People often say, "Oh, they don't have teeth." I'm like, they do. They just put a mouth guard in. But
Okay.
the other states and territories, they don't like South Australia, for example. They don't. They've got a mental health commission, but it doesn't really have any powers to sort of
Sure.
enforce the law or handle complaints. Yeah, so it's different state to state,
Yeah.
basically.
Okay. I actually used to work with one of the commissioners. So yeah, but so I wonder, like, and I've never heard this aspect of their work. I don't think they have a complaints
No,
commission within
no.
their team, and I'm wondering whether that means we just don't. Like, what do we do with all those complaints? I have no idea.
I think so. What tends to happen across
Sorry
the
to
other states and
give your apologies
territories.
on my state.
No, no, no. I've been looking into this a lot, and I know a lot of other state and territories are reaching out because I think we've actually got the model right in terms of the powers. We just need to actually have a bit more courage to use them, and it's not just about powers. It's about being smarter about how we do all this stuff. But essentially, I think you would have a health complaints body, like a generalist
Okay.
health complaints body, and the mental health stuff just rolls into that. But there's real differences. Like there's basically not many other areas of healthcare where you get your rights taken away in such a
Mm,
profound way as you do in mental health. And so that was the argument for the creation of the Mental Health Complaints Commission 9 years ago, was that, well, we actually need a specialist body with sufficient powers and expertise to protect people's rights. And so I think there's definitely an argument for other states and territories having
yeah.
a
Would you mind
specialist
giving a
body.
couple of examples of what they might look like? Because this has predominantly been a happiness, sort of a positive psych lens. We're
Yeah.
really big advocates, and it's the topic of my whole PhD, was the dual continuum model of mental health. So I don't know if you've heard of that before, but basically how well-being and mental well-being is related to mental illness and mental health conditions. basically saying they're not the opposites,
Mm,
which I think plays into sort of like personal recovery ideas that you might be more familiar with.
yeah,
But so the point is we don't want to just just focus on happiness.
yeah.
It would be great to hear a couple of examples
Of like complaints that might crop up
of like
or
where you
more.
would no, if people don't have an image in their mind of what do you mean by human rights being taken away
Oh,
in
yeah,
mental
yeah,
health care that you
yeah.
might not see in other types of healthcare.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, so if you if I was behaving a way that you sort of think is strange right now, somebody, you could call a mental health clinician or the local mental health service, depending on the numbers that they have around the state. And every state and territory has mental health laws of some description, and someone could come out here to. I'm in my co-working space, and this happens where someone could come out here and do a mental health assessment on me, and they might decide that I have a mental health issue and that maybe I'm at risk to myself or someone else, and that they therefore need to detain me. And so what that would look like is, firstly, like strangers coming into my office or to my home or whatnot. I've never met them before, don't have any therapeutic relationship with them. They don't really have anything. They don't know anything about me other than basic kind of collateral, that's been given by, maybe a family member or someone I don't trust, possibly. Um, then if I don't agree to go, the police will come and potentially restrain you and or restrain me if I was the person being assessed. People get taken away in a a police car, or they might be physically restrained and strapped to a bed, and so. Then you're taken to a mental health. You'd be given medication against your will, and when you get to the hospital, you usually get put in these like high dependency units or high intensity. There's different words, but essentially they're really closed environments. There's not much visual stimuli around. You might be put straight into seclusion, which is like solitary confinement, and that's a room basically with not much in it, and you can't leave. Um, and you might be having the worst time of your life emotionally, but then you're put in this pretty full-on situation too. You're surrounded by other people who might be in a lot of distress and might be just as confused as you are. And you might have a forced injection of some description put into you, which heavily sedates you as well. And again, you probably haven't been involved in the decision-making process at any point in that continuum or those events. And so you can imagine what your therapeutic relationship is with the people involved at that point
Yeah.
too. And we don't have laws like that allow that in, podiatry. And I could sort of
Sure.
go, agree to disagree, Mr. or Miss Podiatrist, and we go our separate ways. But me disagreeing with the podiatrist in mental health is actually evidence that I lack insight sometimes.
Yeah.
So, you kind of get caught in this double binds where your disagreement is evidence that you're wrong in the first place. And, I can give you examples of things that have happened in mental health units that are really quite shocking. But that's just probably the very common way in which people are
Yeah.
involuntarily taken into the system.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so yeah, I'm hoping that's that's painting a very I think it did paint a very clear picture of what this can look like. Again, I guess it's not something that necessarily lots of people would be exposed to. It's not like
No.
well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how commonly these sorts of things are occurring in a day-to-day basis, like in the state of
Yeah.
Victoria. But
Well, I mean, we use a lot of force in Victoria, so our systems. I often say our system's so bad we have to force people to use it a lot, and so the I think it is, it doesn't happen to a lot of people, but we all probably know somebody, whether or not that's public or not, who's
sure.
had some one of these experiences. The other thing to note though is they're closed environments, so they're literally locked wards, so you can't enter and leave. You can't really get media in there too easily, and so one of the other reasons we don't know is that. There's not actually that much information that gets
Mm,
out of locked wards, and so I don't mean to scare people unnecessarily, but there are real issues in these mental health units, and when you talk to people who've been detained within them, there's a lot of consistency about the kinds of themes of experiences of power and control
Yeah.
in the mental health
Yeah.
system. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I have to admit, I like that you're able to weave in a couple of jokes for such a heavy topic. Obviously, I see that you don't take it lightly, but it does help. So you say that other states have health complaint bodies. Like, have you tried almost like, I've been watching like Suits recently. So again, it's like wrong example, but like building precedents. Like, I went
Yeah.
to South Australia and their health complaints, they were happy to publish this. Like, why can't, X?
Why can't we do that in
Yeah,
Victoria?
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we've got the precinct, we've got the ombuds, we've got all the bodies here in Victoria that do it. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
but like
that's
specifically for mental health, say, I don't know.
yeah. Not really, because basically, I don't think the other health complaints bodies would disaggregate. Well, there'd be a lot of effort for them to disaggregate that data because they're generalists, So they would have the podiatry complaints,
Right.
all of the other ones, and they wouldn't, neuroticize over the mental health complaints like I do because there's a specialist body for that. So probably could go to some of those in other states and territories. I know other colleagues that are working in New South Wales and WA are certainly starting to think about this a lot more. But realistically, we're kind of at the start of this journey in terms of raising
Yeah.
awareness rather than close to the end. Yeah.
Oh, it's really interesting. And so you've just walked out of. So I said that they were suing you. That was not correct, obviously. Slightly sensationalist. I've been a journalist for about 25 minutes, and I'm already making up stuff. So this is their appeal to your appeal. Is that
Well,
what?
no, yeah, exactly. So I made an application. They said no. Then I appealed that to the Information Commissioner, and then the Commissioner found in my favour, and they said, "Oh, no, we're going to appeal that." So,
Okay.
so now we're at VCAT. Hopefully, we can resolve it at VCAT, the Administrative Tribunal, because the next stop is the Supreme Court, which could get very expensive for everyone involved.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And so you've just walked out of something, but do you have like an indication of how it's going? You sort of said it's going to take a year or something.
Yeah, I mean, our courts are really under-resourced here in Victoria. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's probably.
Yeah.
I'd sort of.
Probably.
I don't want to. Yeah, I feel like they're under-resourced everywhere. So I reckon it'll be at least a year. That we had what's called a directions hearing, and I'm telling you this stuff in real time as I learn a lot of this because I studied law and I write a lot on human rights and mental health. But funnily enough, that was my first time in anything resembling a courtroom. So I was a
Okay.
nervous little bunny. Yeah, I think it'll go for about a year. I think it'll go for about a
Okay.
year. That was just setting directions. So literally just we're not going to hear your arguments. And I even slipped into making an argument, and they're like, we're not here for that, Simon. And it was about just figuring out how we're going to figure out a timeline to sort this case out. So
Okay.
yeah, right at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, like, how long has it been going from the start? I think you sent me a Guardian article. I thought that was like from 2015 or something. How long has this been?
Well, so there's the commission started in 2014, July
Okay.
2014, so they've been around for 9 years. They started making these reports that contain all of their recommendations in about 2017, 2018. I know because I helped design them.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
so yeah, that's one of the parts about being in the public sector is you end up knowing where all the skeletons are buried. But so I thought very early on this stuff needs to be public. It's not
Yeah.
like it's not that sensationalist. It's just about where the system's doing well and where it needs to improve. Yeah, we've been asking for a few years, myself and other people. The Royal Commission actually recommended service level data, so it said like to drive better performance, you need to publish service level data because if you kind of keep it all general, then the
Yeah.
lowest performing ones can cut free ride on the benefits of the best performing ones.
Right. Right.
So having it just having transparency
Yeah.
can allow people in we've got Warrnambool, which is a small town near the border with South Australia. It can help people in that area know where their specific hospital
Yeah.
ranks relative to others, but also where it needs to improve.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I'm making this up, but there could be something about culturally safe care out there, and the local Aboriginal community and leaders could connect with the hospital, and if that was publicly known, there's a lot more that could be done, to
Yeah.
help improve the system.
Yeah. Okay. And like, this might be a completely dumb question. I'm more than happy for you to tell me that. But so I'm imagining like they give you this Excel spreadsheet where it's like column is almost like not name because you don't want names, but some identifier that some individual like me, if I had done a complaint, there's something about it that I could recognize in myself there about myself. But then there's the service provider, and then there's, I guess, whatever the complaint was, and then how well they've sort of met that that voluntary recommendation. Can't we just delete that first column? Do you know what I mean? Like, does there have to be any information at all about the complainant?
Well, there's not, like, that's the weird thing, is there's not even in the I've FOI'd I'll make an example document available for your readers. So that I FOI'd at the start of last year, and I got the whole report. They just redacted the box where the recommendations are.
Okay.
And so it's just like there's no like secret sauce here. There's just dot points that says Flinders University. It'll just say. Because it's all in that report, it'll be all Flinders University recommendations, and just in there, there'll be one dot point that says, undertake training on cultural safety for mental health nurses in the inpatient unit. The next dot point will say, review policies and procedures so that the least restrictive care is provided on admission.
Okay. But
That's it. That's all. That's it.
Let's keep picking on Flinders, even though we've had excellent care there. My son was born there. It was a very good job. But let's say we went there, and I had a complaint about restrictive practice, and then the report comes out. You've got it from Freedom of Information. It comes out. How do I know that I'm not one of 10 people that made that complaint? Like, in terms of like me identifying myself, it's a ridiculous thing to say. The way you said it, I thought it says like a 30-year-old male put in a complaint about this in January.
No, so you'll get.
It's just institution and what the recommendation was.
Yeah. So when you close your complaint, unless they've changed all of the forms and stuff, you'll get a decision letter, and it'll have like, Matt, this is all the stuff that's happened. This is how we assessed your complaint. Clearly, all this stuff is really personal. And then at the bottom, it will just say, to close your complaint, we've made 3 recommendations, and let's say the first 2 of those are actually really personal ones. So it's like, meet with, Flinders agrees to meet with Matt to apologise for this, that, and the other. And then the third one, it just says review policies and procedures to ensure least restrictive care at the point of admission. It's just that third one that's already represented in this box, in this report. They don't put the other ones in that box to the back, because this is reported back to the service, and the service gets this report at the end of each year, and it's just so the Flinders gets to pick it up and go, oh yeah, so what were the 30 recommendations we had to improve? Oh, okay, here they are. Like that's the function of the box, Yeah.
All right, I'm trying to.
For the listeners, Matt's eyes just rolled into the back of his head, which is very affirming for me. But I don't want to put words into your eyes, but that's what I saw.
No, that's
anyway.
okay. Yeah, I mean, there will be video as well released, but I guess what I'm trying to, with my journalist hat on, it's not. I don't know how good of a job I'm doing so far, but it's like, let's give a steelman argument to their issue. So they.
Absolutely.
If they have these 2 points, well, one's already been ticked off by the Public Health Commissioner, so I'm not even going to go there. I will appeal to the power of the Commissioner.
Yeah.
But the second is about the anonymity, and I'm just not hearing it. Like, what could there possibly be there?
Look, this.
And especially because it's like the fault won't even lie on them anyway. Like, you might think to yourself, oh, they're trying to protect themselves. It's got nothing to do with them.
No. Well, the commissioner, the information commissioner, ordered them to do it. So, like, nobody can, like, I mean, I'm not here to provide legal advice, but like, if you were the commission, and somebody said you violated my privacy by publishing that, I don't know why anyone ever would do that, but for the reasons that we've spoken about, if you were the commissioner, you'd say, well, we were ordered to do that by the
Right.
information commissioner. So,
Right.
we were just doing what we were told. So, clearly, like the punchline here, folks, is that they've not made good recommendations for 9 years, and they don't want us to see them.
Okay.
And so, that's just front up. Let's learn from it. And we've got a new commission starting soon, and it's a few of the same people. That's fine. But let's just learn and get better. I
Yeah.
find it bizarre. I find it bizarre. They're painting themselves into a corner here, which we don't need to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so so in a way, actually, there is something that they have to lose in a way, which is that you're almost saying the recommendations themselves that they are giving might not be that good. So in a way, there is something sort of to
Yeah.
hide, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's
but
that's
how would
that's possible.
you?
That's possible. That's possible. I should
Yeah.
say.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's possible. No, no, no. I mean, I sounded way more certain than I was there. But
Sure.
in the
Sorry.
absence of it, being published, I mean, and
It
when
would be the
we probe,
assumption.
yeah, and when we probe the reasons given, they don't stand up very well. So your mind does turn to other possibilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And so, how would you evaluate a good or a bad recommendation? Like, do you have to? I would imagine you'd want to, like, do you think you can look at this list and say, like, that's a good one, that's a bad one? How would you actually evaluate it if you had it?
I think it's a really good question, and uh, I suppose the value of that is it's a collaborative exercise, right? So who am I to reflect on
Okay.
cultural safety, right?
Okay.
Like I'm a white cis dude, and I don't have lived experience of the relevant issue, but having that stuff done publicly, you would have Aboriginal health experts, local Aboriginal community leaders, be able to look at that and say, no, I reckon, well, don't change the policies and procedures. That won't do anything. Make them pay to bring us in to do
Right.
to do training over 6 months to provide, an understanding of the needs of the local Aboriginal
Yeah.
community, or
Yeah.
if
Okay.
it's
I'm with you.
if it's about a human rights issue, you might sort of say, well, actually, this isn't a policies and procedures problem. We should really be sort of having a look at the culture within the organisation and look at some of the power imbalances between clinicians and people who
Yeah.
use the services. You can kind of you would sort of know this in healthcare systems. Like the policies and procedures are, they're not the thing that drive culture. It's
Sure.
leadership and things like
Yeah.
that. And the
Yeah.
recommendations could far more meaningfully. So it's not just compliance notices. I often say
Sure.
the 14,000 number because that's what everyone's going to
Yeah.
remember. But really, the stuff that'll get the change is in your areas of public health specialty, getting you involved in to have a look at those recommendations and give feedback. People in other areas of expertise, and the benefit is if you actually are a commission that wants to do things, you're getting all this free labor out there from the community who are
Yeah.
participating in the process. So
Yeah.
it's if you want to achieve what you're required to achieve, it's a win. It is a win.
Sure. Sure. And I can imagine there's like a benefit of, in a way, not I'm not going to call it a benefit, but if you get this data and let's fingers crossed for your sake you get it, or not just for your sake but for the sake of Victoria, you could you go this far as to say, like, you say, like, I'm just thinking still in the way of evaluating a recommendation, it's like in 2017 you made this recommendation, they actually fully actioned that recommendation, except the complaints kept happening.
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore it wasn't,
Exactly.
it wasn't a solution. That recommendation clearly wasn't can you go to
Exactly.
that level of sort of evaluation, do you
Well,
think?
that's exactly the level that you would go to, and then you would have like people like yourself who would be able to, you would be able to pick up the data, and you're like, I'm so bad at quantitative methods, but you would be able to do some, this is where I'm really looking forward to you correcting me actually, but you'd be able to do some regression analysis of how certain things predict other things, and these recommendations that policies and procedures recommendations did not materially impact whether the same number of recommendations occurred afterwards, but training and culture-focused ones did, or this we could generate so much more meaningful data and interpretation out of that process if it was just made available. And the value of complaints. You would see this all the time in public health. It's like, some report goes out there and it just sits on a shelf. Like there's a Auditor General's report or some inquiry report into this, that, and the other. The benefit of a complaint is it's a very tight feedback loop in the sense of you go right into the culture, you go right into where it's happening, and you essentially are having an experiment about how to fix it and how to change the underlying conditions to prevent it from happening again. And maybe we do exactly what you say, and we make a recommendation, and I'm the commission, and they implement the 4 things, and it doesn't solve it. And so then we trial and error. We try to do something else. It allows for much more iterative, recommendations development as well. But we just, for all we know, they've just made the same recommendations for 9 years in a row.
Right. Yeah. And I think you've made a good point there where you say, actually, there's all this, how big could the Mental Health Complaints Commission be? How many people would it be? Like, we're talking 50
30,
people,
30,
10 people?
30. Yeah,
right.
30.
So that's, I guess my point is, like, you've got 30 people doing a fair bit of work. I mean, 14,000 complaints.
Mm.
And it's almost like you say, they're actually doing it in a closed loop when actually that could be an open loop, getting expertise from all over the place.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and so with the law, with this appeal, is it like the Mental Health Commission versus Simon? Like, is that how it reads, or are you representing some body, or how does it kind of look?
No, yeah, my name's up in headlights. I think it's Simon Katterl versus Mental Health Complaints Commission, which it sounds pretty funny, doesn't it? But
be the title of a book for sure.
Yeah, well, I am writing a book at the moment, so
cool.
if you're listening, Commission, this is all going to be in there.
This is chapter 2.
Yes, it's chapter 2. It's and like I do with all of my writing, I'll send them a draft version in advance so they can provide a comment.
Nice.
I think it'll be myself, but realistically, there's so many other people who have made complaints that are contacting me, saying that they need this to be addressed, and it's people like yourself or people who signed the petition that are really sort of building a bit of momentum about the need to think critically about this.
Yeah, okay. And so if people want to support this or support you, what kind of things, what could we be doing?
I would say 2 things. I would say one specific thing, which is, please sign the petition and share it with your friends and family. Even if you're outside of Victoria, what happens here will set a precedent for what's expected elsewhere. I was at a conference last week in Adelaide, and spoke about the fact that if we get some wins in our context, we'll be able to generalise that across the country. So that'd be the first thing: is sign the petition and share, even if you're not inside Victoria. I suppose the second thing I would say is, if you're somebody who identifies as having lived experience of mental health issues, or you want to be an ally to somebody who does, join your local peak body as a member. So every state and territory has a peak representative body for people with lived experience, and they do that. They're often been around for possibly decades, and have done advocacy around human rights for a really long period of time. And they're under-resourced. But they're saturated and rich in history. So I'd recommend joining that either as a member if you've got lived experience, or if there's some other way you can sign up to their newsletters. So South Australia's got one. It's called LELAN. I can't remember what it stands for. Yeah, they're great. But there's different ones across every state and territory.
Yeah, cool. There you go. All right, perfect. And so let's. spewing you were in Adelaide. That would have been nice to catch up. Anyway, but tell me about the conference, because it was like MHS. Is it Mental Health Services Conference? I saw it on Twitter, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And
I think the only thing more contentious than this court case is whether you pronounce it themes or thems. So there's the Mental Health Services Conference,
Oh,
but
okay.
but it's like, as since time immemorial, some people have been calling it themes and others thems. So I'm a themser. So I was there. Luckily, the theme this year, or the themes this year, was making rights real. So this was
Okay.
very timely.
Cool.
So I was fortunate to see some incredible speakers, including some former UN special rapporteurs, and I was fortunate to give a couple of talks myself too. Mm.
Yeah, and I saw some people, like I say, just been popping up everywhere, man. Like, I saw a couple of people write like that. You gave a very powerful presentation with lots of, sort of. I think they wrote something like, yeah, I guess eye-opening ideas. Do you mind sort of going into what you were sort of talking about in the conference?
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, I reckon the one that people really gelled with, and reason I'm leaning into this is because it's not my work, it's someone else's. Is I did a conference that sort of, we've got a consumer day, so it's sort of a lived experience day, and I was fortunate to do the sort of morning keynote for that, and I spoke a bit about power. And so within mental health, for all the reasons that we were talking about earlier, there's pretty significant power imbalances between people who use services and governments or mental health service
Yeah,
providers.
yeah,
And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And there's power imbalances also in terms of hierarchies within a service. So, psychiatrists, generally speaking, considered the most powerful, both culturally and legally and pay-wise. And then, often at the bottom are the peer workers, the people with lived experience who work in there. And we talk about power imbalances between the professional groups as well. Anyway, my talk was saying, look, we do need to acknowledge those power imbalances. But we also need to actually start to try to build our power. So
yeah,
let's move from just, if we acknowledge it too much and finish the conversation there, we will get caught in a trap of reifying or solidifying those power relations. So let's think of actually, how do we consciously build our power, not for any kind of malevolent purpose, but because we want to build a system that
yeah,
we would want to use. And so we talked a bit about that, and I picked up work from someone who I don't think you've interviewed, but is the coolest person ever, is Professor Sharon Friel. I don't. She used to be she is, sorry, the head of the Menzies Health Governance Institute, which is
okay,
out of the ANU, and she and a bunch of colleagues came up with this health equity power framework. So how power shapes health policy, and the influence of neoliberalism, sort of ecological harms, patriarchy, colonialism, and a whole range of other forces, and how they shape different types of powers and different spaces in which
yep,
power operates. And so I did a very poor man's interpretation of that as it applies to mental health, and then what we can action from that.
yeah,
And
cool,
so I think that really resonated with people. Yeah.
great. Are you able to share some of the sort of the actions,
Well, I suppose you
or is
sort
it
of,
too?
well, so I think I will trust that maybe the podcast gods will allow Professor Friel to perhaps talk to
Okay,
you one day,
cool, yeah,
and I'm sure. We've written stuff together. She would
okay,
delight in correcting me too, because we've got a good relationship. So I'll let her correct anything I say over the next minute or two. But not that she needs my permission either. But she talks about a lot of the different sources of power. So that there can kind of be like economic power. So certain economic groups can shape policy, and you think of
yep,
the mining companies, right, and how
yeah,
they shape
yeah,
our
yeah,
environmental
for sure.
policy and the
Great
health impacts
example.
of that, right? Like,
Yep,
um, you can talk about like there's different. I'd sort of have to bring it up in front of me, but physical power, so like being physically stronger,
yep,
and having the ability to physically actually impose force upon people, like the police. There's like a range of different sources of power, and
yeah,
so you could assess where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. And when you're thinking about the power that holds the system in place, what do you need to address
right,
to build your sources of power, and maybe challenge some of their sources of power, to try to sort of address the underlying, power or political conditions that are allowing things to
Okay.
stay in place. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so have you applied that sort of framework to your scenario? Is that an
Yeah, I
unfair
mean,
question?
I think no, absolutely. I think so, and I mean the best work is done collaboratively. So,
Yep.
I think I'm still learning, like everyone is, but in this space. But for me, yeah, I think so. I think, in the couple of years since I've started doing consulting, I've tried to be really consciously build the power with my little bits of power, build the power of the consumer movement, which is that lived
Hmm.
experience movement I spoke about. So you heard 10 minutes ago, my recommendation was to go join your local peak. And
Sure.
that's me intentionally saying,
Yeah.
okay, listeners, these are the experts you need to listen to. This is the body. Build the cultural power of that organisation in South Australia and Queensland and whatnot. So that's, an example of that, trying to build connections over time, with with media, so that you can tell your story. So you would have seen around this work on the commission is that the media have covered it. That didn't come out of nowhere. I had spent a lot of time building connections, trying to find ways that the media would find this and the community would find this stuff interesting, because I could
Sure.
talk
Yeah.
black and blue about regulation and how cool it is from my perspective, but it will put other people into a coma, and so I needed to sort of refine that and build relationships with media that could safely tell people's stories too, because it's actually not a
Hmm.
safe process sometimes to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
tell your story and tell people's story. And it's about working in networks too. So trying to make sure, we're working in concert, where you can be an ally to someone else, and they can be an ally to you, and you're building shared values and norms as you're going. One of the other things I'm doing at the moment is I'm interviewing some people tomorrow, who are consumer academics. So they're academics that specifically work from the consumer lived experience
Yeah.
perspective. And part of that is me just using the privilege and power I have to platform, which is what you're doing, Matt. Privilege and power I have to platform the work of consumer academics who are often not understood within the wider population. And so that's an example of me trying to intentionally build the power of that movement. So it's not necessarily about personal power all the time, it's
Sure.
about
Sure.
this kind of movement building. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. That's interesting. Very. Yeah. I guess I always just want concrete examples, I guess, and that was very concrete. So that's very useful.
Yeah.
So in terms of we've kind of, you know, we haven't learned a bunch about you, I don't think, so far. We've kind of
Yeah.
heard this specific story, but I'm
Mm.
wondering if you could almost paint a picture of like what is in your sort of um, what would you call it? Like I guess your focus area. You know,
Mm.
what does the ideal scenario look like? You know, what is it that you're mostly obviously there's the sharing of the informations and the requests and stuff, but
Yeah.
is there more to the picture? Because obviously this is like a
Yeah.
specific part of your life. It's not the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of broadly speaking, I think that we the way we approach mental health is a consequence um, of a set of historical decisions and
Yep.
legacies and
Yep.
interests that
Yep.
have created a system that works for basically, well, partially works for basically everyone except the people who use it. And so, for me, the foundational question is, how do we create systems? And that's not just mental health systems, that's broader,
Sure. No,
social
absolutely. Yeah.
policy. I mean, that's totally the whole well-being kind of approach to things, isn't it? To not medicalize it. And, how do we create systems that just let people live the life that they want to live,
Hmm.
including whether they have distress or not, but hopefully we can prevent the trauma that
Yeah.
underlies that distress. And so, for me, I think having things like, a well-being framework around our budgets, that's a useful starting point. I think baking human rights into the way that we make policy at the very beginning. So, like, as soon as you're starting to do something, you think about, well, how do we do this in a non-discriminatory way? How do we do this in a way that, is culturally safe or meets the needs of trans and gender diverse, folk? Front-ending that stuff from the very beginning, I think that it's like an early intervention strategy to trying to bake human rights in early so it doesn't sort of metastasize into like big human rights issues down the track in a hospital. But you do that. The people who are heads of services are often ideally people with lived experience who've gone through services. And then when we come to having human rights issues, which are a product of mental health laws that we have. So we have discriminatory mental health laws that don't occur in other areas of healthcare. My view, and this is the view of the UN, of the United Nations, and really should be the view of Australia because we signed up to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is we need to actually abolish compulsory mental health treatment. And so, we need to be moving in that direction and trying to move in. It seems almost unimaginable at the moment, but most of the big challenges we face in the world and that we've previously faced seemed unimaginable until we, took those first steps towards it. So, I think you would be trying to change laws so that we're moving away from that. And in the meantime, you're using complaints and bad experiences to actually take us further towards that goal. So we want to get rid of force. So how do we use Matt or Simon's bad experience in a way to prevent it happening to the next person? So I won't close a complaint into that mental health service until I'm satisfied that I've addressed to the best of all our collective ability the underlying conditions that led to that use of force. And if you do that, if you have like a never complaints, quote unquote, never complaints approach to never again complaints approach to things, then you can use complaints to really try to change systems, in quite a profound way. And it's different, you've got some books on the shelf behind you. It's different to the reports that just end up on a shelf because you're changing it in real time, in trial and error, and you've got the powers to just direct services to potentially do it. Now, what you might find at the end of that, which is what you talked about earlier, is we might do everything we can, and some bad stuff still happens because there's systemic drivers. Then we talk about that. Then the commission talks to government and says, your welfare system is pipelining people into the mental health system because they're not getting enough housing or they're not getting enough this, that, and the other. But we're so far from that conversation because we're not even dealing with the complaints we have particularly well.
There you go. All right. Well, that's, so you've got your work ahead of you, basically.
Well, we all do. I think,
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah,
Sorry,
and I think a lot of you
push that out to everyone else to do the job, and I'll just watch from the sidelines.
No, that's the thing. I think a lot, listening to some of your the people that you've interviewed in this podcast, there's so much to add there that if we integrate an approach to well-being and positive psychology at the outset of our social policy, demand on mental health services will drop quite dramatically. And I think I don't know how much this comes up in your podcast, but I think there's a downside to how much we're framing everything as a diagnosable mental health issue, because it sucks everything into the mental health system rather than treating it as other failures of social policy that we can address, and so I think that we need to think a bit more critically about how we're medicalizing everything.
I sometimes talk about well-being as like the worst sales pitch of all time, because it's like, if we just focused on well-being, we'd solve everything. That's not a good sales pitch. But I do also kind of believe it, and I think there's a fair bit of evidence sort of stacking up on that side of things. But
totally.
Yeah, I think, as I understand, you sort of listened to the Nancy Hay episode recently, and I think she said it so well, which was just that there is no department, no one has this responsibility. So do you have did that bring up anything for you, this idea of because like I say, I know nothing about government, I know nothing about law, but what would you like to see?
Well, I think
is it just collaboration, or between departments, or is it a new department?
Yeah, I think we're at the start of some of those. Well, I'm at the start of some of those conversations. I'm pretty sure Nancy is, 10 or 20, 30 years into that
Sure.
conversation. Yeah, yeah. But what I would say is that there's examples of it going of early steps being made. So we've got the measuring what matters framework in the Commonwealth government's budget papers. The mental health data was like 6 years or something out of date. But there's positive signs there. Don't know how we're going to improve well-being while we do the stage three tax cuts and gut our welfare system of the money it needs to do things. But so that's an example of what we shouldn't be. Well, one thing we should be doing, and then an example of what we shouldn't be doing. In Victoria, one of the things that we're doing that's really exciting, and I was fortunate to work on, was we've got a monitoring and outcomes performance framework. The actual title of it's like 75 times longer than that, and I never remember it. But I was fortunate to come on there as a consultant, and I can't talk too much about the details of it, other than because it hasn't been released. But other than to say that. It doesn't just focus on the mental health system. It focuses on the drivers and measuring the performance of government against a whole bunch of broader drivers about distress and well-being. And particularly, are we helping people live the life they want to live? Not the life I prescribe someone to live, but the life that they want to live. Using those measures. So I think that there's exciting work underway. I think people like Nancy and other people you interview will be much more sophisticated in their thinking on that.
Sure.
I just had a
I think,
little role. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So listen, thank you so much for your time, Simon. This has been really great. I have one last question, and it's kind of a cheeky question, I have to admit. But I'll ask it anyway. In terms of like lived experience and consulting and things like this, I think like undeniably there's a place for it.
Yeah.
But there is also sometimes I sense and I get the feeling from others around that there's a time when it goes too far, when actually we forget that, like if there's a lived experience, there's someone with a lived experience. Like we've been doing this a little bit outside of the mental health space in actually breast cancer survivorship. And so something like totally different.
Yeah.
But they are individual experiences, and sometimes you hear of like I don't know if you call it a horror story, but probably poor examples of practice where one person's experience, which is very specific to them, guides the direction of a whole,
strategy
or something like that. Yeah, like would you say that never happens, or like how do we protect against this sort of thing?
No, that totally happens for sure. I mean, I can only talk about it in mental health. I don't know, much outside of that space. But that's one of the things that the mental health space has done really well, but isn't very well understood. And I use, consumer lived experience intentionally, that word, because there's a consumer movement. And so one of the issues, and one of the things I'm actually interviewing those people about tomorrow, is this distinction between lived experience and being like a consumer leader or working from a consumer perspective. And so if you're someone with lived experience of mental health issues, that's a unique experience that I've had. But actually, to be honest, my experience of the mental health system has been all right. Like I sort of got things on my terms. Now, if we built out a system based on my lived experience, I probably wouldn't address that. We wouldn't address the needs of heaps of other people's issues and experiences of the system. So, yeah, so the way I approach and the way consumer perspective people approach is they but behind them have a history of that consumer movement that's been going for 20, 30, 40 years, And so, there's lots of other movements like disability pride movements and whatnot. And so, there's a long, rich history at which people not slot into, but form part of. And so a lot of the stuff I spoke to you about today is not my experience, but I guess I'm speaking in solidarity. And so, what I would say is in mental health spaces, just ensure that person has connection to their consumer community so that they can speak meaningfully, not just to their experience, unless that's all you want, unless that's all, not to minimize that, but unless that's,
there are times when that would be specifically required, yeah.
Exactly. But there's other times where, you need to be able to use your experience, but step back and look at the experiences of that movement more generally, and speak to that. And so there's a real question of solidarity there too. So are you speaking in solidarity with your consumer colleagues? And so that's a safeguard against what you're talking about. It's also a much more profound challenge to the system too,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
usually when I talk to you right now, I'm talking with the weight of 1,000 voices, not speaking for them, but in solidarity with them.
Mm, mm.
And if we all talk about that at the same time, and that comes back to power, the system will be forced to turn quite quickly, and
Sure,
so
sure.
that's one of the reasons I sort of encourage people to join up to Leland or Vimiac or Being, which are the different consumer peak bodies in different parts of Australia. Yeah.
Nice. All right, cool. And I had just one other question popped into my mind. This might be so dumb, but I just want to hear it.
Yeah.
You said that you did get that report, but it was all sort of blacked out.
Yeah.
Did you know when you I just had this image of my head of you being like, yeah, I finally get it, and they emailed it to me, and I opened the attachment, scrolled to the bit where I want to get to, and it's all been blocked? Or did you know
Yeah.
that it was blocked before it was coming to you?
I had a hint because we had a telephone conversation about it, and they explained their logic to me, and I was driving along like the M2, and I was just looking out the window, being like, I couldn't understand the logic behind it. So, but I actually wrote to them in advance, and I said, please, for all of these conversations, like these public conversations, I promise you, Matt, I've had like 30 private conversations to try to resolve it. But I remember writing to them saying, don't reject it. You know me. I'm that annoying bee in the bonnet. I'm going to appeal it. You, and you also
Save
know
us
I'm
all
going to.
the
Yeah, save us all the hassle. My letter was like, this is all the case law. I'm going to win. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not in your interest to do it. Anyway, they did it. So here we are. It made for a great podcast, hopefully, anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, mate, and well, good luck. We'll keep watching how it goes, and look forward to seeing that data.
Thanks so much for having me on, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, thanks.